We're joined by Justin Hopkins, the publisher of On3's ScoopDuck.com, and it has been quite a week in Eugene, Oregon. I guess we should start with the 4th of July commitment, the fireworks from Dakorien Moore, the receiver from Duncanville, Texas. This is one that I know Oregon wanted him very bad, but when that green smoke appeared, how happy was the Duck fan base?
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you think about it historically, Oregon has been in the top 2, top 3, whatever, for a lot of 5 stars from Texas, from the Southeast, some of the elite guys. And they really have yet to land one, right? I mean, of course, they have Dallas Wilson committed, but he was actually a 4-star at the time and, has seen his ranking increase. Dakorien Moore is different, right? So every Duck fan sitting there like, is this the one? Is this really the one? And it turns out it was. So, yeah, just kind of like that moment of disbelief and relief and then excitement, like all wrapped up in about 5 to 10 seconds for Duck fans.
Well, this is the highest rated recruit who's ever committed to Oregon. And it's hard to explain to people, just because they've been so successful. We were talking about this before we started recording. I look at the beginning of Oregon's, this era of Oregon football, kind of the end of the Rich Brooks era, going into Mike Bellotti. But I think a lot of people kind of tag it to when Chip Kelly took over as the head coach. But let's even if we just start there, even if we just start in 2009, Oregon has been ridiculously successful relative to most college football programs. But I don't think people realize they've done it in a lot of cases with guys who were sort of unearthed. Now, there were occasional DeAnthony Thomas, like big time recruits, but it wasn't like they were beating out the biggest of the big dogs for players, and it feels like they are now.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. Like Dakorien Moore is different. What Oregon's doing recruiting-wise is different. We're really not used to seeing Oregon beat out Alabama or Ohio State or, Texas or these elite schools for recruits. And Dan Lanning's doing it left and right. Back in the day, Oregon did get a few 5-stars here and there, but largely it was beating out USC, who was recruiting a little bit better at the time for those guys, which was still a big win. But these are more monumental wins, and it's really just amazing to see the tide changing. I know you and I talk about it, but just the way Oregon's recruiting, they're recruiting like a true blue blood, and it's pretty amazing.
And nationwide, because if you look at, if you look at our team rankings at On3, there's a tab you can click on that shows you the average distance from home for each school's recruiting class. And Oregon's is like 1,300 miles, and nobody else is over 600 or 700. And most, a lot of the good recruiting schools are at 300, 400 at average distance. Oregon has a lot more work to do because there's just not that talent doesn't necessarily live in the Pacific Northwest. And it used to be, they could go to Southern California and get some, but I mean, I look at this class. So you mentioned Dallas Wilson earlier. He's in Tampa. They're recruiting DJ Pickett, the 5-star cornerback from Zephyr Hills, Florida, which is, one county north. Dorian Brew, the 5-star cornerback from Conroe, Texas, committed last week. Jordan Davison from Mater Dei in Orange County in California, he committed. That's a more traditional one, but like the tight end, Desan Braun from Derby, Kansas, they're going everywhere, it seems, for people.
Yeah, it's like, okay, who are the top 2 or 3 players in the, talent producing states? Okay, let's go after them. And like I say, I mean, that's unheard of. Like if Oregon ended up with Dallas Wilson and Dorian Brew were the only 2, most Duck fans would be like, okay, that's pretty good. We're pretty happy. But like you're looking at what they're doing right now, and Dakorien Moore, just, everybody and their mom thought this kid's going Texas. He's going Texas. He's going Texas. And next thing you know, Dan Lanning and Junior Adams and the crew just pull a rabbit out of the hat once again.
Well, and Texas is a hard thing to sell against right now when you're recruiting a Texas receiver, because they've had success with Sark's offense. We just saw Xavier Worthy go in the first round. So like, it's understandable that, somebody might want to stay close to home and go to a good school, but Oregon does seem to have, an edge. And, since Dan Lanning got there, Mario Cristobal recruited well at Oregon, but it feels like it has risen several levels higher since Dan Lanning got there.
100%. I mean, this thing changed with Mario Cristobal. I mean, he showed that you can recruit to Oregon. He deserves a lot of credit for that. And I know Duck fans are upset with Cristobal with the way he left, but he opened the door here. I mean, he really did. And I think what you've seen is obviously Dan Lanning is very good at what he does, but I think he's also shown that he's committed to the University of Oregon and staying long-term and wanting to be there. I think the university, and yes, largely Phil Knight, have rewarded him by reciprocating that, right? I mean, let's not pretend Oregon's getting these guys for free. There's got to be some good NIL backing there. And I think Oregon's committed to Dan Lanning the way that he's committed, and you're seeing that. And one thing that I want to say, and I'm going to say it now because I'll forget because I have bad memory. Oregon is not richer than these other schools. Sure, Phil Knight has a lot of money, right? And he can spend whatever he wants to spend. But he's really not out here writing senseless checks. I think in a lot of these cases, Oregon isn't necessarily beating these guys out with NIL money. I think they're being competitive. They're making fair offers. But you look at Oregon and you look at USC right now, and they're recruiting completely different levels right now. Oregon does not have more money than USC, right? That's a very rich school down there. They got a lot of big pockets. Okay. But the structure is the key. The organization of Oregon's NIL is the key. It's put together in such a thoughtful way, and there's so many long-term benefits as to what Oregon presents on their NIL packages. That's really what gets the parents and the kids motivated, because it's not them, here's $5 million or something ridiculous. Like, look, here's a competitive offer, but then look at how this thing can stack up for you and how we can help you grow your brand and really help you monetize things. And I think that's what people are missing. I know a lot of fans are mad at Oregon because they're recruiting at an unreal level that we've never seen. But you have to understand, I just don't think they're out there out buying everybody. They're competitive.
Well, and we're learning that as the numbers start to come in, as we get some more data, and the players help us with this stuff too. But yeah, Texas has money. Texas has a good collective. Missouri has money. They have a really good collective. Alabama, Ohio State, obviously they've recruited well forever. Georgia, LSU, they've recruited well forever. And the other thing I always laugh at, because this was always people would say, well, if you could pay the players, Phil Knight's just going to buy everybody for Oregon and Nike. Well, okay, I'm looking at our top 5 industry ranking right now for the class of 2025. Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, LSU, Georgia. All Nike schools. So you can't really favor one over the other either. And I realize, like, he's not day to day anymore there, but still, it's a good point to bring up. But I will say, and you were talking about this, so Division Street, their collective, seems to have been better organized sooner than almost everybody else's.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're the blueprint that everybody's trying to copy, right? They're trying to, hey, what's Division Street doing? Because they're doing it right, and it's not just pure money, it's organization, it's all those things that they're doing really well. And they are setting the bar for NIL collectives. And the best part is they figured it out. It's not just recruiting. Okay. They're doing a really good job with team stuff too. That's why you don't see Oregon lose many of their top players over for transfers every year. So, Division Street's just got it going on both avenues, if you will.
So let's talk about this, because you revisited this column last week as a lot of these guys were committing and a lot of this was happening. Is Oregon a blue blood? And you say no. You say they're not there yet. I'm not sure I agree with that. I feel like this was kind of the final step. And I guess you can say they've got to win a national title. And they don't have one in their history. There has been no first-time national champion since the 1996 Florida Gators. So the next first-time national champ will be the first in a long, long time, in 28 years. If it's this year, it's 28 years. But Oregon would be my pick based on just what they've done. They've gotten in the national championship game twice in that span. And now they have a roster that feels like it can compete with the teams that are winning national championships.
No, it's there's a few schools that the blue blood debate is really interesting about. Oregon's one of them. I think Clemson's one of them. LSU. There's some that, okay, USC is another one, right? USC is definitely a blue blood, but their success has been, quite removed from now. And Oregon's an interesting study because the name of the game anymore is branding, right? We know that branding at a school level, branding at an individual player level, like branding is key, right? And you might argue there's not very many bigger brands out there than the Oregon brand. I mean, there's just not. It's everywhere. The uniforms, the innovation, all of those things. I mean, it's truly an elite top 5 school in that regard. They just don't have a national championship yet. And to my point in that column, like with what Dan Lanning's doing now, imagine Dan Lanning on the recruiting trail with a national championship under his belt. Look out.
Well, and that's the thing. We've seen schools that have outpaced their traditional recruiting, like Texas A&M did it a couple of years ago. But like I would argue, this class that Dan Lanning's putting together is much more organized, and you can see how it fits needs. And we'll talk about the safeties. They're still recruiting some safeties like Jonah Williams and Trey McNutt. I think they're the top 2 safeties in the country right now. They're trying to get those guys. There might be other ones in the class who are really good. And then they've got to decide how many do they want to keep if all these guys commit. And, that's the sort of problem that Nick Saban had at Alabama, or the sort of problem that Kirby Smart has at Georgia, where they might have to turn somebody away who 10 years ago would have been the top ranked player in their class.
You're 100% right. I mean, it's funny because I joked about this with Josh Newberg the other day, but it's like, man, I feel like I'm Bama Online's Tim Watts now, the way he's covered recruiting for, 2 decades under Nick Saban and all, we got these 5 stars. We're going to have to let this top 150 player go. Like, what? Everybody wants that kid. Like, yeah, we just don't have room anymore. Oregon's doing that. And to your point, Oregon, we've seen Oregon recruit classes well before, but a lot of times there's been some filler. Like, and by that, I mean, they went and signed a highly ranked wide receiver that frankly they didn't need. They already had 4 or 5 committed and they didn't need a 6th one, but they did it because it inflated their ranking.
Right.
We're not doing that here. The roster management's second to none. I mean, honestly, I think Oregon wants to take 2 safeties in this class. I think that was the plan all along. And they very well could end up with Trey McNutt and Jonah Williams. And I mean, they wanted to sign probably 2 corners in this class. They could potentially end up with DJ Pickett and Brandon Finney, and they're going to be done. Like, they're going to be happy and be done, and there's no hard feelings. And it's, to your point, it's pretty crazy how efficiently they've recruited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, DJ Pickett, another one, a 5-star plus corner from Zephyr Hills, Florida. He's committing on July 17th, considering Florida, Miami, and Georgia. So that's the fact that they can go into Florida now, or they could go. I mean, they went into Maryland. You mentioned Finney. He's from Maryland. That I believe they beat up Penn State for him, which is a school that would traditionally recruit, that Mid-Atlantic region. So yeah, Dan Lanning. And what's interesting about Dan Lanning's background, he's an unusual background coach. A lot of guys are in one tree. They've coached in one region. And I know people associate Dan Lanning with Kirby Smart because he was the DC at Georgia before he got this job. But he also worked at Memphis under Mike Norvell. He worked at various places. He grew up in Kansas. So this is a guy who's been a little bit of everywhere now.
Yeah, and he's really kind of brought the best parts all together, right? I think, when I look at Dan Lanning and I maybe I catch him in a private setting or, somewhere where the cameras aren't on and all that, he really reminds me of kind of a combination of Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, and Mike Norvell. And what I mean by that is, Nick Saban is a grinder, worker. I mean, incredible coach, right? One of the best ever to do it, but he's not super personable, right? Mike Norvell, kind of a rising star still, even though he's a little bit more, aligned than maybe Lanning is now. Super personable guy, right? Like really smart, really good. Like, not to take it, but he's very personable.
Yeah.
And you look at Lanning and it's like, okay, you're kind of like both of them, because Lanning's a hoot, man. He's a good guy. He'll remember stuff. You're like, how do you remember that? And just, he's got kind of all of that. And then of course, I mentioned Kirby Smart. Kirby's obviously one of the top defensive minds and just a recruiting monster. And you look at it, not that Nick Saban wasn't, but you just look at it and Lanning's like really kind of all 3 combined. Yeah.
Nick Saban and Kirby Smart kind of like wake up every day trying to figure out how to kick everybody's ass. And I feel like Lanning's got that vibe to him too. even though, like you said, he can joke around with you like Mike Norvell can, but it's just beneath the surface. You kind of feel that little bit simmering there.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that he's got a fire unlike anybody else. And that's that's an infectious thing, right? Your team picks that up, recruits pick that up, parents pick that up. That's something that you can't fake. You can't fake that. I mean, you could tell people you're working hard and do all this and that, but I mean, at the end of the day, you can't fake it. These guys recognize, coaches that are that way. And like I said, I also think, there's this too, and this isn't a bad thing. Kids are different now than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Like just the way their mental makeup, their emotional makeup, they're different. And you have to recruit, I think the old school way of kind of maybe the hardcore Nick Saban, because even Nick Saban had to adjust a little bit before he retired, in the way he recruited, in the way that maybe he talked to some kids at practice and this and that. And I'm not saying anything negative here. I'm just saying that's a reality. And I think Dan Lanning's ability to be approachable and to be flexible and to relate is really good. And I think that pays off.
So we've talked about the guys who may be there in 2025. Let's talk about the guys who signed in 2024. Who out of that freshman class do you expect to have an impact in Oregon's first Big Ten season?
The hard part is when it comes to that, they signed so many impactful transfers and didn't have a lot of holes. I think we're going to see a lot of those guys redshirt. And so there's really, and so like a Jeremiah McClellan or Ryan Pelham, those guys are really, really good players, and they would probably not necessarily start, but at least play in most wide receiver rooms. I think they're going to have a really tough time at Oregon. I mean, you're looking at, Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson and, all those guys that are there now. And that's what makes this scary, right? You're going to take that 24 class and all those guys are going to have probably full eligibility. And then you're going to combine that with the 25 class. Oregon will have a pretty solid group of guys that won't be around next year that either go to the NFL early or have to go to the NFL or have ran out of, college eligibility. And I think Dan Lanning knows that, which is why they place such an emphasis on this 25 class, because these two, this 24 and 25 group, are going to come in. And now you're looking at, the next 2-3 years potentially with this group all together. I guess if it comes together, Oregon's going to be really good for a while. But yeah, I mean, the hard part is the transfer portal, right? Because you got Dylan Gabriel, you got Derek Harmon, Evan Stewart that I just talked about, Jabbar Muhammad. All those guys are going to come in and play. Like, I mean, they're going to play.
Kobe Savage from K-State.
Dude's going to light up the Big Ten. I mean, it's just, it's down a list. And it's like, I think they made the push to be in the playoffs this year, and they're building, that class and this next class to be, kind of the continuum after that.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting how they basically filled every need in the transfer. And I look at, like, it's interesting because Dante Moore probably qualifies as that class of 2024 quarterback. Or, I mean, you could call him the class 2023 quarterback because he was committed to be in that class. Kind of realized he needed some seasoning after getting to play a little bit. And that I still find that completely fascinating, because usually you don't see that with quarterbacks where they go, you know what? Maybe I do need to learn a little bit and go work with Will Stein and work behind Dylan Gabriel. That's
going to be a unique case study. Like, it really is. It's going to be an outlier. We might not ever see that again in college football in the transfer portal era. And it, like you said, it's like how they did that, I don't know if you want to say they convinced him or helped him realize that himself, but like, you just think it's like, man, you guys got Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore, and he knows that he's probably not going to start this year, which, by the way, I've heard that competition has been really exciting, all summer and all spring. Those two are battling back and forth. So I would say that it's hard to say Gabriel won't start, but I think those two are a lot closer than folks think.
Yeah, we had Will Stein on a few weeks ago. I feel very confident in Dylan Gabriel, I think, at this point. But, they have a very talented backup, which I mentioned this last week regarding Texas, because, Quinn Ewers has not played a full season yet as the starter. He's gotten hurt both years and had to miss games. Like, if you have designs on the national title, you're going to have to play 16 or 17 games to win it. You better have a good backup quarterback. You better have a good backup everything.
Yeah, I agree. It's it's no longer how good is your starting lineup. It's your two deep. Like that's how we're going to have to start looking at teams is, how good is Bama's two deep? How good is Georgia's two deep? Ohio State, Oregon. You know what I mean? If they just got a good starting 11 or a good starting 22, yeah, that's probably great for the first half of the season. But when that second half and then that last third gets there, you're playing good on good every week at that point, and your guys are tired and beat up, and it's going to take its toll. So, now your strength and conditioning program is really tested. Your sports science, your sports injury science, those guys are tested, and your depth is going to be truly tested. I mean, the teams that we see more than likely win it probably still have their starting quarterback and are the least beat up at the rest of the positions along the way. That might very well be the case.
Yeah, and Oregon wants to be in that club. They want to be in that group. So we'll see if they have what it takes. Now, you mentioned what they got out of the transfer portal this year. A guy who came to Oregon through the transfer portal. Let's talk about Khyree Jackson, because one of the saddest stories you're going to hear. He passed away this past weekend. Died in a car crash in Maryland. A couple other college football players also passed away with him. Khyree Jackson played at Oregon. He had been at Alabama before that, and was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in April, and had his whole NFL career ahead of him. And what did he mean to Oregon in his time there?
Yeah, I think when somebody gets the chance to talk to Dan Lanning about that tragedy, I think you're going to hear probably a very emotional story, because there's a guy that was at Alabama, and we know came out of high school with tons of potential, tons of, 5-star elite player, all the tangibles you'd want as a corner. And just, it wasn't all clicking at Alabama, right? Like played, but wasn't the guy that maybe they expected, maybe found himself in Saban's doghouse a little bit.
Was playing behind 2 first-rounders. Like,
right.
That's
right.
part of it too.
Yeah. But somehow comes to Oregon and decides, hey, I'm going to check something else out. Maybe a change in scenery is what I need. And obviously me being an Oregon guy and following Oregon, the outpouring I saw from former players, all of the coaches, former coaches that have left to go to other jobs, just really resonated that, man, this guy was one of those guys that walked into a room and lit it up with his smile and lit it up with just kind of being there in his presence and being a positive spirit. And so I think that's something. Obviously we could talk about Khyree, the football player, and that is what it is. Khyree, the person, just, it seemed as though he was somebody everyone wanted to be around and couldn't help but smile when they saw him. And, that's going to be, missed from playing.
It felt like everybody who'd played with him every step of the way, the guys who played with him in Oregon, Terrion Arnold has a really touching tribute to him, who played with him in Alabama. Yeah, it did seem like he just had such he was a bright light anywhere he was. So, prayers with his family, and just awful story. But J-Hop, thank you so much, because this has been a really interesting discussion. And now I think I need to figure out who the Blue Bloods are. I think that's the next step. Like, who are the Blue Bloods of college football? Because we gotta agree on a definition. We got to figure all this stuff out, because I do think if Oregon's not one, what do you got to do to become one?
No, I love your work. I respect your work, and I would love to read that and get your thoughts on it, because I'm like you. Like, what are the parameters here? Is it because you won a national championship? Is it because you've got X amount of boosters? Like, what's the criteria? And college football has changed so much that I think your blue blood criteria from 10 years ago is not the same criteria today.
Right. Oh, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. You mentioned LSU. Does LSU belong? Well, yeah, if we're talking about this century, 100%, they won 3 national titles, and they always have good players. So, but it took Nick Saban kind of unlocking the formula for that to work. With Oregon, it took, it was a team effort. I've done stories about how they used the power of Nike, and how, Tinker Hatfield came in and helped them. And it's amazing. It's actually the Oregon rise in football is a really good business story as much as it is a sports story.
And I think it speaks to the power of the brand of Oregon, right? Because, and I have to give credit, Rob Mullins does a pretty dang good job at his job. And, just like I said, I think it speaks to the brand of Oregon. If we're talking about pure brands, Oregon is a blue blood brand. I mean, you go anywhere around the country and you'll see
The
Duck
O,
fans.
yeah, it's identifiable. Like, and I think that's a good question. And maybe as I create that criteria list, if I put your logo in front of a kid in Miami, in New York, in California, and in Texas, do they all recognize it? Can they all start naming players? Like, I think that matters because I know if I put that Georgia G in front of them, they'll know that. They'll know the Ohio State O, the block O. They'll know the Michigan block M, but they'll also know that O.
Yep. 100%. You're 100% right. It's like Coca-Cola, right? I mean, you know it. Don't change the name. You know it. Which is
exactly right.
Yeah. Which reminds me of like when AT&T changed its name to Singular like 15 years ago. I was like, what are you doing? That lasted for a minute, but yeah, that's the power of branding. And I would say Oregon's a blue blood brand, but they haven't won a national championship. You got an interesting column to write.
I do. I appreciate the assignment. I like it. This is good off-season stuff right here. J-Hop, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.